Can romance anime save young men? That is the question we are going to be talking about today. So, we are seeing, unfortunately, a rise in male loneliness and men shifting towards the far right and fringe, extremely antisocial groups, particularly online. And now, we cannot say that the anime community is free of this slide. Unfortunately, there is a large swath of the manga community that has fallen victim to this far-right intrusion into young men. However, I do think there is something that can help young men. It won't fix them entirely, but it can help them. And do you know what that is? That's right, romance anime. We have seen over the past few years that romance anime has become extremely mainstream and extremely popular. That's not to say that romance anime in the past wasn't popular. The likes of Inuyasha were some of the best well-known anime in the world. However, in the last few years, we have seen romance anime become more and more popular. And when I say romance anime, I don't necessarily mean shoujo anime, even though I think young men should watch shoujo anime because it's fantastic. COLLEEN'S Manga X is a great source to go off to find shoujo manga and anime for you to watch. However, I think romance in general can help young men. There are good examples of this, which we'll be talking about in this video, but there are also bad examples that I wouldn't suggest, and perhaps I can make another video on that in the future. However, in this video, I want to talk about two anime in particular. The first one being one that came out last year. It is A Sign of Affection. And the other one is one that has just wrapped up here in the West, I believe, and it is Fragrant Flower. Both of these anime, I believe, are great examples of very positive male role models for young men. And by young men, I mean teenagers going into their mid to late 20s. That's what I would constitute a young man, but I think someone outside of this range could also benefit from watching these shows. So, let's start off with A Sign of Affection. Quick plot summary for this season of A Sign of Affection. We are following Yuki, a deaf girl who is going to university, and she falls in love with one of her upperclassmen, and this is all about their relationship and the trials and tribulations that Yuki faces and the relationship faces in the way of general romance drama, but also how Yuki's deafness plays into this. But our main subject for this video is her boyfriend, spoiler alert, Itsuomi, who is the great male role model I think a lot of young men can take away from and actually learn about. So, Itsuomi is older than Yuki, and Itsuomi is an individual who is well-travelled. He obviously comes from a well-off family, so there is a class dynamic to this which I really want to talk about, but it's not relevant to this video, but I will maybe talk about that in the future. But Itsuomi is very well-off, which means he is very well-travelled. Him being well-travelled doesn't necessarily make him better, but it is the experiences that was forced onto him that made him better, if that makes sense. Itsuomi is someone who is very confident, is very forward, he is someone who is happy to try new things and learn new things, and that is exactly the kind of role model that young men need. And Itsuomi doesn't do this in a way that is necessarily harmful to others. He does this in an attempt to become closer to others, to learn about others, people who have experienced things that he hasn't experienced, but he wants to learn from them. And I think a problem that a lot of young men face are they don't want to learn about other people, especially people who are different, because these young men are afraid of standing out and afraid of being ridiculed for being different. What is the cause of this? Well, in my opinion, it is the patriarchy. The patriarchy has made it so that young men feel like They have a very rigid structure as to what they need to be. And any challenge to this patriarchy leads to a massive backlash. For example, we are seeing that backlash play out in this far-right incursion into young men. We were challenging the patriarchy with things like the Me Too movement, with the rise of feminism. And I don't think liberal feminism is the best way of going about things, but it is something that has faced a huge backlash from people who promote the patriarchy. And that is why things like feminism and the Me Too movement are being belittled by young men. Itsomi, however, sees people who are different, and he genuinely wants to learn about them. He wants to learn about their life experiences, what it is like for them to be different. And not only that, he wants to help them. He's the kind of person who wants to go out of his way to make that person feel like they belong. He starts to learn sign language for Yuki, initially because he kind of wants her to fit in, to feel like she has someone else to talk to, because there aren't many people around her that know sign language. And then obviously he develops romantic feelings for her, and maybe his purpose for knowing sign language slightly shifts. However, the purpose of him getting into learning sign language is that he wants to help her. He wants to ensure that she feels welcome in the spaces she is in. This is something that the far right and the patriarchy actually pushes young men to not want to accept others. They teach you that being different from the patriarchy is wrong. They teach these young men that wanting to help others is a sign of weakness, that you should leave others to fend for themselves, and that you should be extremely individualistic. And that is so harmful to these young men. Itsomi is the exact opposite of this. Is he a perfect individual? He kind of seems like it, but we are seeing this through Yuki's point of view for the most part. But also, Itsomi isn't perfect, and you do learn more about how he got to be where he is, which is a great guy, but he did have trials and tribulations to overcome. I don't really want to spoil that, so you should go off and watch the show for that. However, he does have flaws, but he does discuss with Yuki, and Yuki actually guides him and helps him to overcome those flaws. And these aren't deep-seated, horrible things about him, but they are things that can be improved, and he is willing to improve. He is willing to change, which is something that the patriarch and the far right don't want young men to do. They don't want young men to escape the vortex because they can exploit them if they keep them inside the vortex. Honestly, watching a character like Itsomi made me think, as someone who is quite a few years older than the character, wow, I wish when I was that age, I was that kind of guy. Our second example, Fragrant Flower, actually surrounds the main character this time. It is Rintaro. And Rintaro is an example of a young man who is a high schooler, so this does appeal to the lower age group of the group I am trying to suggest to watch these things. But Rintaro is a high schooler who is already a very nice guy, but he is going through situations where he could very easily fall into the far right. Rintaro is an example of the kind of boy that the far right wants to exploit. Rintaro is an outsider. He does have friends, and these friends are important to his growth and development, and we'll get into them later. But Rintaro is seen as different. He is much taller, he is stronger, he is bigger, he looks kind of scary. And so he has been ostracized for a lot of his life. And through that ostracizing, it is very easy for someone like Rintaro, and he does in the beginning of the show, feel like he doesn't belong. And he can very easily go down a dark path. However, he doesn't. He maintains this attitude of, okay, I am bad, I don't like myself, but I'm not going to harm others. He is a gentle giant, per se, and he hasn't fallen prey to the far right. I don't think that's something that was a thing that would happen in this show, just because that's not what this show is about. However, in reality, it very easily could have happened. And what stops him doing that? Well, it is himself not wanting to be seen like that. He wants to improve. He wants people to like him, but he doesn't want to be the kind of person that harms others. And that's a great attitude for him to have intrinsically. And that is something that the characters he meets along the way help him develop and actually make him an even better individual. There are a few characters that help spur Rintaro into this development and help him really come into his own. But the main one is Kaoruko, or Waguri, however you want to call her, in the show. She is the love interest of Rintaro, and her extreme positivity, her desire for things to be better, for things to be good, to seeing the intrinsic goodness in people, is what helps Rintaro first escape this potential spiral he could go down. She shows him that he is more than what he is perceived to be. He is actually who he wants to be inside, and him growing closer to her really helps him become a more open person, and the kind of person who I think a lot of these young men who fall for the far right actually are intrinsically inside. They are actually just these young men who feel like they're different, but their difference is what is unique about them. And being unique is a great trait to have generally in life. And Kaoruko really brings this out of him. And then through the show, in relation to her, he expresses and he finds himself. You know, he finds a hobby that he really cares about. He finds a potential job in life that he really cares about. And it's such a positive thing. And it's something that I think young men would really, really benefit from if, you know, there were people around them to help push them this way, or also they could see that there is something better out there for them than this spiral of hatred that the far right pushes onto them, the far right and the patriarchy. Furthermore, Rintaro has a really great group of friends who they know he's different, they understand that he feels a certain way, but they are there for them. And that's why I think relationships and friendships are so important for these young men. If they have people around them, hopefully people who are a positive influence on them, it can really push them to change and be better. These friends acknowledge his feelings, but they never push him or put him in a circumstance where he feels uncomfortable, which could push him the other direction, away from becoming a better person. But they give him the space, but also they allow him to, they give him the grace to express himself, even without him knowing. And I think if you are a young guy watching this and you can see one of your friends spiraling into this place of hatred, give them some grace, give them some space to learn, but just like Rintaro's friends do, if they feel like he is going down a wrong path, they will intervene. You should also intervene and show them the right way, or at least, because that's a very difficult thing to do, at least to guide them in the right direction. Also, if you are someone who is in a position where you have influence over this person, you should also be guiding them too, but this is more so talking to the young lads in the audience. Rintaro has friends and Kaoruko who help guide him towards the light and help guide him towards actually finding the person who he truly wants to be, and you see Rintaro become a much more fully developed and happier individual because of this positive guidance. And I think Rintaro never giving up and accepting guidance is why he is a really great role model for these young men who, especially when you're a teenager, you don't want to listen to guidance of others. You think you know everything, and I get that. But Rintaro taking the guidance and taking the positivity from those around him and seeing that within himself is what makes him such a great role model for these young men, because these young men can go off and do that, and it can actually have a very positive influence on not just their lives, but the people around them. There are many more characters just in these two shows that I could actually go into that can really help young men and serve as great role models for them, and I think I can do that in the future. However, as you can see, romance animes are some anime that can really help young men develop positive attributes and actually escape the pull of the patriarchy. That is not to say that all romance animes are equal, and there are definitely some that probably instill pretty negative things into young men, particularly shonen romance anime. A lot of them veer down that way, and that's maybe something we can discuss in another video in the future. However, I definitely think you should go off and watch A Sign of Affection and also Fragrant Flower. They are both charming, they are lovely, and actually I came away from them feeling very positive and very hopeful.